This week on Quadriga, Syrian spillover. Will NATO be drawn in? A mortar shell fired from inside Syria struck the Turkish town of escalate last week, killing 5 civilians. It wasn't the first time violence in Syria has spilled over the border. But this time, saying it had had enough, Turkey fired back. In Brussels, NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said the alliance is ready to defend Turkey against any attack by Syria. But he added he hopes it will not have to. The conflict in Syria could begin to spread outside its borders. Is NATO's involvement inevitable? Your host on Quadriga this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome. Could the Syrian conflict become a regional conflagration? That's what we want to talk about today with 3 people who've been following events in the region closely. Kristin Hellberg served as a freelance correspondent in Syria until 2009 for both German broadcast and print media. She's now based in Berlin and continues to report frequently from the Middle East. Ralph Gadban is a Lebanese-born expert on Islam and on the Middle East, and he is now based in Berlin. And Stefan Buchen is with the German network ARD. He reports frequently from the Middle East and the Arab world. Kristin Hellberg, what do you make of this latest report that Turkey has forced down a Syrian Airbus flying from Moscow? Seems like a pretty aggressive move.
Well, I think Turkey is trying to accelerate the pressure on the Syrian regime. And we don't have to forget that there is an arms embargo implemented by the European Union on Syria. And there is the suspicion that arms are still reaching the Syrian regime from Russia and from Iran. So this machine was coming from Moscow, heading for Syria and using the Turkish airspace. So the Turkish government says, we will not allow our airspace to be used for weapon delivery to Syria. So they said, okay, let's calm this down, let's bring this down, and let's look what they have loaded. And they obviously found some non-civilian cargo, whatever this means, but they confiscated some of the cargo. I think this is just a way to make it clear that we will not, Turkey will not tolerate any kind of weapon delivery to the Assad regime.
Well, Stefan Buchen, originally Turkey had seemed to be trying to play down the conflict, saying actually it's more of a humanitarian issue than a military one. Do you think that position seems to be changing on the part of the Turks?
Turkey is concerned by one thing, that there could be a spillover into Turkey concerning the PKK guerrilla, the Kurdish guerrilla in the southeast of Turkey. There is plenty of evidence that the Assad regime is supporting the PKK, and we have seen during the last months and weeks that there are increasing deadly attacks against Turkish targets in Turkey. Many Turkish soldiers were killed by attacks perpetrated by the PKK guerrillas, and that means that the Syrian conflict already has spilled over into Turkish territory, and that's why the Turkish government is interested in reining in the Assad regime and helping to bring about its fall down as soon as possible.
It sounds like you think then that the cross-border firing that has killed some people in Turkey was intentional rather than accidental. Syria has said that it was, in essence, collateral damage.
I was not there. It could have been accidental, but it's very, very clear that there is a conflict between Turkey and Syria, and the interest is the PKK. The PKK, the Erdogan government tried to bring about peace with the Kurds before the breakout of the Syrian conflicts. There were some improvements in the relationship between Turks and Kurds within Turkey, but now because the Assad regime is supporting the PKK and encouraging it to kill Turkish soldiers on Turkish soil, so there is a conflict and a clear Turkish interest to bring about the fall down of the Assad regime as soon as possible, as I said.
Ralph Gottman, remind us of the overall context here in terms of Turkish-Syrian relations. Turkey apparently is host to a very large contingent of the Syrian opposition, the rebels, and also to nearly 100,000 Turkish Syrian refugees.
I think it's very important to know that, to see that the Turkish government is playing down the conflict with Syrian. At the beginning of the war, almost 2 years ago, the Erdogan considered any conflict in Syria as internal conflict in Turkey, and his foreign minister says nobody can take a step in the Near East without the permission of the Turkey. The self-confidence of the government in Turkey was very big. Now they are retracted. They don't want any conflict with Syrian because Syrian is supporting the PKK. The Kurds, and the internal Alawi opposition to the politic of Erdogan is growing up. We should not.
The Alawites, of course, being the clan of Assad.
The Alawi in Turkey, it's another Shiite sect. Their solidarity with Assad is because they are Shiite. The sect of Assad is Nusayri. They are in Iskenderun, where the refugees are posted, and they are against it. And the internal opposition to the politic of Erdogan is due to the fact that all terrorists, like from Qaeda and Salafi, are coming in Turkey, and it is not good for the stability of the country.
To what degree are such jihadists now flowing across borders, whether it's the Turkish border, the Jordanian border? To what degree are we seeing a movement of jihadists coming in to try to fight with the rebels?
I don't think that they are crossing the border of Jordan. They are coming over Iraq and Turkey, and they are financed from the Gulf, Qatar especially, and a lot of private rich men in the Gulf who always financed the Qaeda in the world. They are doing the same in Turkey at the moment.
Christian Helberg, are you also of the opinion that there's a grave threat here of jihadists coming in across the regional borders?
Actually, we don't know how many jihadists we have in Syria. There is proof that there are some groups with a radical Islamic and international agenda that are not only interested in toppling this regime because the Syrian people are striving for democracy and freedom, but they have an international agenda. We don't know how many they are, but they are there, and their influence is growing because they are better equipped, they are internationally connected, they have networks they rely on, from Iraq especially. We have seen major bombings in Aleppo and in Damascus, suicide bombings that were delivered, or that the Nusra Front, which is called Nusra Front, claimed itself responsible for, which has links to Al-Qaeda.
There were 2 attacks just this week within Syria by Nusra.
Yes, there's an interesting difference to Iraq, though. They are now targeting only military targets. They say they have learned from the experience in Iraq not to cause too many civilian victims, but they focus on military targets. This is, militarily spoken, this is helpful now for the rebels. But politically, it's not helpful for the revolution, because the Syrians themselves, they are still fighting for freedom. They are still fighting for the future of their country. They want to topple their regime. They are not interested in any radical Islamic project. So this is the big danger that comes through these jihadists, that they might influence the fighting in this more radical and more Islamic way that is not originally Syrian.
And of course, it appears to lend support to Mr. Assad's argument that the entire conflict is being orchestrated by terrorists, Stefan Buchen.
I mean, this was the discussion at the beginning of the conflict. This was the rhetoric strategy of Assad to say that he is guaranteeing sectarian peace in Syria. He guarantees peace between the different religions and sects. But this rhetoric or political argument does not play any role anymore. This is a military conflict now, and the Assad regime is fighting for its survival. Probably it will lose sooner or later and fall down. But there's no room anymore for such even rhetoric or political arguments. They are trying with Russian, with Iranian support to stay in power as long as possible. They are even agreeing to lose some territory. They are giving up territory in the northeast of Syria, the Kurdish region, which they handed over to the PKK guerrilla. So it's a war. I said this.
It's a war. Is it still an internal war, or has it already become a cross-border regional war?
It's more and more threatening to spill over and spread towards other countries. As I said, there is already a spillover to Turkey, and now we saw that the Americans sent a task force to Jordan, American advisors, military officers.
150.
150. Yeah, I mean, they are afraid that the Jordanian regime, the regime of King Abdullah II, will be destabilized, and I think that the main task of these officers is to help the Jordanian regime to keep up its stability and stay in power, because there's also unrest within the Jordanian society. There has been unrest since the beginning of the Arab Spring, but now it is renewing, and there are several social groups within Jordan who are not satisfied with the way Abdullah is conducting reforms. There aren't any meaningful reforms within Jordan. So there's a major concern by the US that this will be another country in the Middle East, a neighboring country to Syria, which will be drawn in, which will be drawn in this upheaval, in this regional upheaval, and so of course there's a danger that unrest, civil strife, and even war will be seen in a country like Jordan in the future.
Jordan, of course, being a long-term ally of the U.S. Ralph Godban, Jordan is also a very poor country, meager resources, and currently hosting 200,000 Syrian refugees. Apparently, there was even a riot by some of those refugees in the last few weeks because of conditions there.
It's very important to the European to know if they don't help the refugee in Jordan, they will come to Europe. And until now, they didn't take care about these refugees in Lebanon, in Jordan, and in Turkey. And when the refugees started to come to Europe, they will cry, they will shrine. And so they should help them. But about the question of the politic of Syria, Assad declared many times from the beginning and threatened that he will burn the region. And he tried really to destabilize the political systems in the border countries. He tried with Jordan, but he has no success there. He can't do anything. But in Lebanon, he is behind the clashes in Syria, in Tripoli between Alawi and Sunni. He is, with help of Hezbollah, behind the attempts against politicians and the case
assassination attempts against politicians.
Yeah, Jaja and Boutros Harb. And the case of the ex-minister, Michel Smeha, is very clear. They wanted to kill the patriarch of the Maronite and other people to start a civil war in Lebanon. They Now with Turkey, they are provocating Turkey because the interest of Syria is to internationalize the conflict. If Turkey intervene, that will give the alliance, the so-called alliance between Russia, China, Iran, alibi to intervene on the side of Syrian openly.
In that case, Kristen Hellberg, just one moment. I know you have a comment, but perhaps you can add to it an answer to the following question. In that case, isn't Turkey's latest move to bring this airplane down to the ground and search it actually a potentially very escalatory move? Because that was an airplane coming from Russia.
But Prime Minister Erdogan had to do something. I mean, we don't have to forget that in June, Syria shot down a Turkish aircraft. We had several shootings during all the months this year. So, I mean, Erdogan had to do something about this shooting, about this cross-border artillery fire. I think it's accidentally. I don't think that the Syrian regime has an interest in an open war with Turkey. I think, but this is interesting as well. Why can't they control their mortar fire in this border area? You know, there is fighting exactly on the border. You know, this is just some kilometers away from this Turkish village. But how can they not control that it goes over the border? But I think Erdogan is under pressure. Internally, he has to prove that he's a strong man. He cannot lose his face. He was threatening Syria during several months. Now he had to move. He had to do something. And I think this is just a second way to be clear with the Syrian regime to not allow this weapons delivery, as I just said. But talking about the neighbors, I think we have to be very clear that actually Turkey, we've talked about Turkey, but Lebanon is really the country that is most affected by this conflict because Lebanon itself is split over the Syrian crisis. You have the Syrian government that is led by Hezbollah, which is still on the siding with President Assad, and we have the society and the Sunni Hariri political parties that are with ex-Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri that are helping the opposition even through some maybe, weapon delivery or some financial help. So Lebanon is split over Syria. Iraq is somehow split over Syria. This is very important because you have, in both cases, you have the government that is still holding a protecting hand over the Assad regime, and you have a population and other political parties that are financing or helping the revolution. So this is very, very dangerous because this might destabilize these two countries that they themselves are not stable themselves. Because, I mean, Lebanon is always on the edge of a civil war itself. So this is important.
Stefan Buchen, you had a comment?
I mean, the basic strategy of the West and also of Turkey and the Jordanian government is containment. They don't want to interfere directly into the Syrian conflict, into the Syrian war. They want to help to bring about the fall down of the Assad regime, but they want to do this indirectly by intercepting such an aeroplane which probably may have carried weaponry or military equipment. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, by supporting militarily the rebels, giving them weapons, helping them logistically. That's what's been happening for months now within Syria and in the surrounding countries. But the basic strategy is containment, not interfere and hoping and doing something to end this war by helping the rebels to win militarily against Assad.
You say they don't want to be drawn in, but of course Turkey is a NATO member, and Article 5 of the NATO treaty says that in case of attack against one member, other members would come to that member's defense. So let's take a quick look at past NATO actions and see if any of them offer a possible precedent for involvement here.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded at the dawn of the Cold War in 1949. It initially had 12 members across North America and Europe. It includes a mutual defense pact, set down in the treaty's Article 5. Today, it has 28 members and has expanded its activities worldwide. Article 5 has only been implemented once in the alliance's history. After the 9/11 attacks in the U.S. in 2001, the alliance agreed to several military operations that included the invasion of Afghanistan. But operations have not always just focused on mutual defense. To try to stop massacres during the wars in the former Yugoslavia, NATO forces also intervened in Serbia. But not all of the countries in the organization always agree with its choices. In operations carried out in Libya during the Arab Spring, members were divided on whether or not to get involved. How will they react to the escalating events on the border between Turkey and Syria?
Ralph Godban, what do you think Turkey is looking for from NATO? Simply reassurance or something more?
I think Turkey is disappointed from the NATO, from the West generally, because the West is not ready to intervene in the affairs, in the conflict in Syria. They are against sending money and weapons. They send handies. You can't kill...
Handies are cell phones. For our viewers who do not live in Germany, handies are cell phones.
So it shows that the West, I think personally, that the West is losing a big chance to keep his influence in the Near East. After this conflict, they will not have the same position as before. They are withdrawing. The last agreement between Iraq and I wanted to say the Soviet Union, the Russian, about weapons show that the Russians are coming back in the region. We have a front, Russia, China, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they are at the moment very, very strong. And the West is doing nothing to break this front. They are not ready to send weapons to the rebels. And the government in Turkey retracted because they thought at the beginning they can intervene. Everybody thought Turkey is about to engage in a war against Syria. But now their proposal is that Ashara take the place of Assad. It's
the vice president.
Yes, the vice president. It shows how that's Enttäuschung.
The disappointment.
Big it is.
Of course, Mr. Rasmussen, NATO was still talking about a possible political solution this week. Doesn't look very probable. Christian Hellberg, the role of Russia. If there were to be an all-out conflict here, of course, NATO would be facing off against a Russian proxy. That is certainly not likely to increase NATO's willingness to go in, is it?
No, and it's interesting because we see in Syria some kind of a revival of the Cold War, because really the front line goes between the West, meaning the US and Europe, and Russia and China on the other side. In the Security Council, we see this. The Security Council, the United Nations are completely paralyzed in the Syrian conflict. This makes it so difficult. We have to talk about this maybe, that, you don't have any international solution to this because it's paralyzed for 1.5 years now. So this is why we have to look for some regional solutions, maybe some NATO solution. But the point is, NATO is very reluctant and very cautious about this conflict. They don't want to be drawn in. They have always been clear that they say, yes, we will support Turkey and we are siding with Turkey, but let's look for another solution. They are not interested in any full-out war with Syria. And so what we've heard about from Rasmussen is now that they say they have a plan to defend Turkey. Of course, they have plans to defend any member.
He says they've had the plans in the drawer for years. So, yes, so clearly they're not brand new plans.
They're not preparing.
Stefan Buchen, of course, an action like Libya did begin with a NATO no-fly zone. There are levels of NATO engagement or involvement that fall short of a full-fledged Article 5 defense action.
Yeah, but such a step is not very probable in Syria. If the NATO alliance had been willing to interfere militarily in Syria, they would have imposed a no-fly zone since a long time. But they obviously don't want to do that. And somebody who imposes a no-fly zone has to be ready to implement it. That means that when Syrian planes start to bomb, the NATO force would be obliged to bring down these Syrian planes. So they have to build up a military force in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Turkey, and NATO apparently is not willing to do this.
But could that be changing? After all, you mentioned yourself 150 U.S. advisors on the Jordanian border.
The strategy is containment. The purpose of all this, also the purpose of the sending of these 150 advisors to Jordan, is to contain the conflict in Syria. They don't want that a country like Jordan will be destabilized. NATO obviously doesn't want that the conflict between Kurds and Turks within Turkey breaks up in a violent manner like, let's say, 30 years ago again now because of the Syrian conflict. So the strategy is to avoid these things to happen. But there's a clear political decision within NATO headquarters in Washington and in the European capitals not to interfere militarily into the Syrian conflict. And a clear answer to your question, I think that recent development won't change this. And a hint to this is what Mr. Rasmussen said in Brussels. He again talked about a political solution. I mean, this is really a joke. We know now that there's no political solution to the Syrian conflict. This conflict will be decided militarily. And this declaration of Mr. Rasmussen proves the helplessness of NATO. Of course, there is a massacre in Syria. We were talking about more than 30,000 dead people. This is a very, very bloody conflict, and NATO is not capable to stop it. So this proves in one way the incapacity and helplessness and the weakness of the Western alliance, and this is not a nice thing to witness. And it's getting more and more hard for Mr. Rasmussen and Western politicians to cover this failure.
Kristen Helberg, are you as completely negative about the possibility of a political solution as what we've just heard there from Stefan Buchen?
Oh, political solution is dead. I mean, there's no need to talk about it. I mean, President Assad himself decided for the military solution. He has made it impossible, any kind of dialogue, because he has not stopped shooting unarmed protesters for 1.5 years. He's the one who decided for the military solution, and if we are sending Kofi Annan or Brahimi now, any UN envoy, this is buying time for the Assad regime, and it's helping the international consciousness to stay calm. I mean, this is talking about politics. There won't be any political solution to this conflict. I agree with Stefan Buchen. But I wanted to add something to this, because we have to talk about how much sense would it make such a no-fly zone or such a military intervention inside Syria. Let's talk about the conflict inside Syria. We have in the north and west of Syria, we have these liberated areas, and that has been under control of the Free Syrian Army, this rebel army, for some months. And what we see there is that the people try to build up a post-Assad era. It has started in some towns, it's very impressive. People are rebuilding schools, they are rebuilding hospitals, and they elect councils, and then the Assad regime sends their MiGs and their bombers, and they are just destroying the infrastructure in these areas. So we will never see any kind of post-Assad era prospering in these zones unless we have a way to stop the aircraft, the Air Force.
Do you have a means of doing that to suggest to NATO?
So the point is, the rebels are asking anti-aircraft rockets. They are supposedly there in Turkey, but they're not being delivered because the US doesn't want them. They don't want them to be delivered because they are afraid that they will fall into the wrong hands, meaning Islamists. So they are there, or we help the rebels to bring down these aeroplanes, the Syrian aircrafts, or we impose a no-fly zone, which would be a possibility to at least help or protect the zones that have been liberated by the Syrians themselves. This is not about going there with troops and finishing off Bashar al-Assad or do what they did in Libya. But this is just to help the zones that have already been liberated by the Syrians themselves and to protect them.
Ralph Gutmann, we've seen a lot of blowback in the past. Blowback is the word that's used when we arm a group and later on they use those same weapons against us. What do you think? Is that a real risk here? That has been the argument, of course, that the U.S. has been using to say why it's not arming the rebels in Syria. Is it a valid argument?
I think the West should weapons the rebels in Syria to avoid the consequences. One consequence I want to mention is a local consequence, because the conflict is taking too much time, and the
the divisions between sects,
the sectarian division is deeper than before, and after the conflict, this kind of division will continue. We saw it in Iraq between Shia and Sunni, and that is the politics of the West. That's why many people in the Arab countries saying the West don't want to intervene. They want to split the Near East and in favor to Israel.
Stefan Buchen, Kristen Hellberg's concept of creating some kind of protected zone for the areas that have been attempting to set up an alternative Syria. Is that a realistic proposal? Could that work?
Yeah, what Christine said is very important. This is the most important recent development. It is to be seen within the strategy of containment. There, along the Syrian-Turkish border, within the Syrian territory, we are witnessing the creation of a buffer zone, and a zone where the Turkish military is not present on the ground. They are still able to bomb from the air, but increasingly Turkey and maybe NATO will be able to prevent the Syrian forces to bomb these areas, these buffer zones. We could call them also liberated areas. But these zones may have a strategic objective in the view of NATO that could be helping to prevent a more dangerous spillover to Turkey and to contain the fighting in the heartland of Syria, and to avoid approaching too much the border.
So quite concretely, what would you like to see the West do in that case? And under what auspices? NATO auspices?
I don't doubt that NATO and the West is already helping to establish a new order in this buffer zone, and also to help militarily the rebels. I mean, there is information since last year that NATO is helping militarily the rebels, but this is an indirect involvement into the war. This has been happening, and I don't doubt that this is happening more specifically in this buffer zone. The question is whether NATO will be ready to impose a no-fly zone in this buffer zone. This is really the pressing and sharp question now, and I would agree with such a no-fly zone on the buffer zone, but there has to be a political decision which we have not seen yet.
And we will never see it from the Security Council. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, there are NATO actions that go below that threshold. There has been one very clear statement from the West, a red line, as it were, regarding the use of chemical weapons. The U.S., for instance, has said if Assad were to use chemical weapons, and Syria has a lot of them, that for him would be the provocation, that for Barack Obama would be the provocation where clear action would have to be taken. What's the likelihood of that happening and in that way sparking a NATO involvement?
I mean, first of all, this commentary sounds quite cynical from the point of Syrian activists, telling that, go ahead, Bashar al-Assad, but if you use chemical weapons, we'll stop you. This is like telling you do whatever you want, but not with the chemical weapons. I mean, Syria has a big amount of chemical weapons, probably the biggest amounts within the region. They have transferred these chemical weapons from points of conflict to more safer parts of Syria. I don't consider it very probable that the Assad regime will use these chemical weapons against the population. I mean, this regime is able to do anything. What we've seen here for 1.5 years is terrible. So, but I don't think it's in the interest of the Syrian regime to definitely provoke a country like the US to intervene, obviously, after this warning. What the US is trying to prepare is that in the moment when the Assad regime falls, that people will go in and secure these chemical weapons, because the major threat is not only Bashar al-Assad using them, but having these chemical weapons being transferred to Hezbollah in Lebanon, for example, or to other al-Qaeda groups in Iraq. So this is what they prepare now from Jordan, I think. This is the whole idea
Another
of this
possible
Jordan
action for those specialists who are in
Yes.
Jordan. Ralph Ghadban, we've all said that a political solution in the sense of a negotiated step down from power by Bashar Assad is not going to happen. But could there be a political solution, as it were, from within, in the sense of his Alawite clan simply losing patience with him? We're hearing reports of defections among very high-level military officials and intelligence officials. Does that indicate that perhaps his support is weakening?
We should wait to see if these information are real and if the conflict under the Alawi is big or not. I don't think that the conflict is big under the Alawi. If you consider the kind of clash in Qardaha, in the village of Bashar al-Assad, it was between the chief of the so-called militia Shabbiha and other parties. And we know that the government is building from this Shabbiha, like the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, a militia from 60,000 people. It means his camp has the overhand and is strong enough to continue in this way. And it shows that he has two alternatives. He tries, with the provocation of Turkey, to internationalize the conflict. And he knows that the internationalizing of the conflict is positive to him because the West is weak through many causes. And the second alternative is to split the country. The Kurds have already their autonomous region in the north.
Autonomous region.
And he is building the Alawi state at the clashes in the region of Homs, where Hezbollah intervened and take part on it, shows that they want to connect the region of the Alawi, the mountain of the Alawi, with North Bekaa. It's the region of Hezbollah. So this small state will continue through the Bekaa to South Lebanon, and it will be a big state.
But this, may I add something?
Please.
Yes, just quickly, because talking about these clashes in Qardaha, the hometown of the Assad family, this is important because there is some clashes between Alawite clans, and this brings us to the point that the Alawites are not the elite in Syria. This is important. The key positions in the military and in the secret services and in the military are positioned by Alawites. We have Alawites, key figures there, but there are a lot of Alawite clans who have not, who still live in great poverty, for example. So this, what we see there, is a conflict between Alawites clans, and this is very important for the opposition
and the non-elites.
This is important because the Syrian regime tries to make this conflict a confessional, a sectarian civil war, and if the Alawites start to split, and some of the Alawite clans follow the opposition and the revolution, then we will have a proof, even to the Western world, that this is not a sectarian war, which is not. The front line is still between pro-Assad and anti-Assad. I mean, and if you look at how the regime deals with opposition figures, Christians, Alawites, Druze, it's just the same as with the Sunnis. So there is no sectarian war. It's really about the front line is between pro-government, anti-government.
Stefan Buchen, what do you see as the chances that Assad could fall from withdrawal of support from within?
It's clear that we're witnessing slow erosion of the regime. I have been talking to representatives or sympathizers of the regime living in exile during the last weeks, and they are strengthening one point: we are a state. We are a state trying to crush a rebellion by terrorists. But in fact, we don't have a state here. The Assad regime has been reduced to a gang, to the size of a gang, of a mafia gang. And this mafia gang still is trying to use all its military assets, especially the Air Force, to fight for its survival. This may last for many more weeks and months, but at the end of the day, this gang will fall. But after its fall down, it may continue to exist in the shape of a gang and take part in the ensuing sectarian strife that will surely follow the breakdown of the regime in Syria.
Christian Hilberg, one of the arguments that's often made for more engagement now is that the longer we wait, the longer we let that process go forward, the more damage there will be for the West later on. Would you subscribe to that view, or has the damage already been done?
No, completely. The longer the conflict takes, the more difficult it will be to rebuild Syria and to find a peaceful transitional period that will lead to some kind of democracy. Because what we are seeing is that the sectarian hatred is growing that was not there in the beginning. I mean, this revolution had nothing to do with religion. And now if you are watching demonstrations, if you're watching protests, or even, people defecting from the army, they are all talking about God, they are talking about Islam. So, I mean, this is dangerous. This is dangerous. And I think the international community might regret to not have interfered before, because it will spill over and there will be a regional conflict step by step and not on a full-fledged level from the beginning.
Troubling last words. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in.